In 1972, near the coast of Bulgaria, an excavator operator named Rachel Marinov struck something buried in the earth that would rewrite European prehistory. He wasn't looking for treasure, he was digging a cable trench. But what he found beneath the dirt was a burial, and not just any burial. It was the richest grave in the ancient world, more gold than every other burial on Earth at that time. Combined, gold bulls, gold rings, gold sheets hammered so thin, they caught the light like mirrors. This man was wrapped in wealth that wouldn't be matched for another 2,000 years. For decades, historians called him a king, the first true ruler of Europe's earliest civilization. They imagined him as a powerful European leader, a pale-skinned chieftain commanding a golden empire. But when scientists finally extracted his DNA, they discovered something that shattered that image completely. The Varna Necropolis sits on the western shore of the Black Sea in northeastern Bulgaria. Between 4,600 and 4,400 BC, this was one of the most advanced societies on Earth. They smelted copper. They traded across hundreds of miles. They built the first known social hierarchy in Europe, with a ruling class, a merchant class, and farmers beneath them. And at the center of it all was one man, buried in grave 43 of the Varna Cemetery. The Varna Cemetery was not like anything else in 5th millennium Europe. The burials were deliberate, hierarchical, and loaded with symbolic meaning. When archaeologists opened his grave, they found nearly 1,000 pieces of gold, a gold scepter, a gold-handled war axe, bowl-shaped gold plaques, and a gold sheath that covered him from chest to thigh. No one in the 5th millennium BC was buried like this. Not in Mesopotamia, not in Egypt, not anywhere. This was, at that moment in history, the wealthiest person who had ever lived. And for 50 years, the world assumed they knew what he looked like. In 2018, a team led by geneticist Johannes Krause at the Max Planck Institute extracted DNA from grave 43. They sequenced his genome, and the results contradicted everything the textbooks had assumed. His paternal lineage was haplogroup TM184. Today, that lineage is almost non-existent in Europe. It is most common in East Africa and the Middle East. Fewer than 1% of modern European men carry this lineage. In some Somali populations, it reaches 70%. The same Y chromosome lineage found in this Copper Age king's bones flows through populations on the other side of the Mediterranean, carried there by the same ancient migration routes that once connected West Asia to the Horn of Africa. The Somali Dur clan, the Fulani of West Africa, certain Arabian tribal groups, the Royal House of Bahrain. These are the populations where haplogroup thrives today, not Scandinavia, not Britain, not Central Europe. The man in grave 43 did not carry the genetic signature of modern Europeans. His DNA placed his ancestry squarely among Anatolian farmers, the people who migrated into Europe from what is now Turkey, beginning around 8,500 years ago. His maternal lineage, haplogroup UN, confirmed it. An ancient lineage that traces back to the first human migrations out of Africa, now most common in South Asia and the Near East. But the real shock came in 2025, when a team from the University of Ferrara published a landmark study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They analyzed 348 ancient DNA samples spanning 45,000 years across 34 countries. What they found overturned one of the most deeply held assumptions about European identity. During the Copper Age, the exact period when the Varna king lived, half of the people tested still had dark or intermediate skin tones. Not light, not pale. Dark. The idea that ancient Europeans looked like modern Europeans is a myth that survived until genetic science finally killed it. The SLC-RCC, a gene variant responsible for light skin in modern Europeans, was still spreading during the Copper Age. It wasn't fixed. It wasn't universal. Many people simply did not carry it. Consider Second, the famous ice mummy who lived just a few centuries after the Varna king. His DNA showed he had darker skin than anyone living in southern Europe today. The Varna king would have been the same, an Anatolian farmer's complexion, brown eyes almost certainly, dark hair, a face that would be unrecognizable to anyone imagining a European monarch. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what Varna actually was. The necropolis contains 294 excavated graves, but nearly a third of the site remains unexcavated. Not all graves were equal. Some contained only a few ceramic pots, others had copper tools, but grave 43 stood apart by orders of magnitude. The gold penis sheath alone was unprecedented. No earlier burial anywhere on Earth contained anything like it. This was a man whose society believed he deserved to enter the afterlife covered in metal, and the gold itself, over 6 kilograms of it, was not random decoration. Each piece had a symbolic function. The scepter signified authority, the bulls represented virility and power. The axe meant warfare. But who was this society? The Varna culture thrived on the Black Sea coast from roughly 4,600 to 400 BC. They were among the first people in the world to work gold. Their copper mines near Stara Zagora were among the earliest in the world, feeding a metallurgical industry that turned raw ore into tools, weapons, and status symbols. Their copper mines at Stara Zagora were among the earliest in the world. Their trade networks reached the Volga River to the east and the Mediterranean to the south. They traded spondylus shells from the Mediterranean, a luxury material that functioned like currency, and they processed salt from the Solnitsata mine, possibly the oldest salt production site in Europe. This was not a primitive village. This was a complex economy with social classes, long-distance trade, and technological innovation that predated Egypt's first pyramids by more than 1,000 years. When researchers looked at the Grave 43 genome through the lens of ancient population genetics, the picture became even more surprising. His autosomal DNA, the full picture of his ancestry, aligned with early European farmers, people who had migrated from Anatolia into Southeast Europe thousands of years earlier, displacing and mixing with the indigenous hunter-gatherers. But here is where the story gets more complex. The Max Planck team also found something unexpected at other graves in the same cemetery. At least one individual at Varna and several at nearby Bulgarian sites carried ancestry from the Eastern European steppe. This was the earliest evidence of steppe DNA this far west in Europe. 2,000 years before the mass migration of steppe herders reshaped the population of northern Europe, traces of their DNA were already appearing in Bulgaria. The Varna king himself did not carry steppe ancestry. His was a farmer's genome, but he ruled a society that was already beginning to encounter people from the east, people who would eventually transform Europe's entire genetic landscape. The Black Sea coast was the frontier, the place where two genetically distinct worlds, Anatolian farmers and Eastern European steppe herders, first made contact. The artifacts tell the same story, trade goods from the east appearing alongside local Varna craftsmanship, two traditions beginning to overlap. So what did the Varna king actually look like? To answer that, we need to understand what forensic DNA phenotyping can tell us and what it can't. The Hyrasplex system uses 41 genetic variants to predict skin, hair, and eye color from ancient DNA. It is the same tool forensic investigators use to generate suspect descriptions from crime scene samples. For the Varna king, the available genetic evidence points to a consistent picture. His Anatolian farmer ancestry carried variants associated with darker pigmentation, brown eyes, dark hair, skin darker than any modern Southern European. This is what the wealthiest man of the 5th millennium BC most likely looked like. Not the pale-skinned chieftain that European history books imagined for half a century. A man whose face would have been more at home in modern-day Turkey or the Levant than in modern-day Bulgaria. And he wasn't unusual. The 2025 study proved that his appearance was entirely typical for his era. Half the continent looked like him. The Varna king story connects directly to another famous ancient European, Watsi, the Iceman, who lived roughly 1,000 years later in the Alps. When researchers sequenced Thifton-Tsitse's genome in 2023, they discovered his skin was genetically darker than any modern Southern European, the darkest pigmentation ever recorded in a contemporary European individual. His genome also showed he was nearly bald and had brown eyes, nothing like the rugged mountain man with flowing hair that museums had displayed for decades. He also had brown eyes and was nearly bald, contradicting decades of reconstructions that showed him with pale skin and a full head of brown hair. The old Tsitse looked like a modern Austrian mountain farmer. The real Tsitse looked nothing like him. The pattern is consistent across every era. The further back in European history you go, the darker the faces become. The pale European is a recent invention, not an ancient truth, and this pattern repeats across every Copper Age and early Bronze Age genome that has been phenotyped. The Cheddar man from Britain, dark skin, blue eyes. The Lochboer man from Luxembourg, dark skin, blue eyes. Blue eyes evolved early, light skin did not. That disconnect, ancient Europeans with dark skin and blue eyes, is one of the most counterintuitive findings in modern genetics. The key to understanding European pigmentation lies in a handful of genes. SLC-rCA is the most important. A single variant of this gene accounts for roughly a third of the pigmentation difference between Europeans and Africans today. In modern Europeans, this variant is found at nearly 100% frequency. But in the Copper Age, it was still spreading. Many individuals did not carry it at all. The Varna king's Anatolian farmer ancestors brought lighter skin alleles into Europe, but those alleles hadn't reached fixation yet. His society was genetically transitional, darker than modern Europeans, lighter than their African ancestors, and his Y-DNA haplogroup, TM184, reinforces this West Asian connection. Today, this lineage peaks not in Europe, but in the Horn of Africa, among Somali clans, and in the Arabian Peninsula. Even Thomas Jefferson carried haplogroup T, a reminder that this ancient West Asian lineage quietly persisted in scattered populations long after its Copper Age peak. Thomas Jefferson also carried haplogroup T. It is a lineage that links the Varna king not to Northern European Vikings or Celtic chieftains, but to Neolithic farmers who originated in the Levant and spread both west into Europe and south into Africa. But here is what makes the Varna story genuinely revolutionary. This man was not just any farmer. He was the most powerful person in the most advanced civilization in 5th millennium Europe. And his power had nothing to do with looking European. His wealth came from metallurgy, from trade, from controlling the flow of copper, gold, and salt along the Black Sea coast. His status was economic and political, not ethnic. The Varna culture produced some of the earliest evidence of extreme wealth inequality. Some graves held thousands of gold objects. Others held nothing at all. This wasn't about race. This was about resources. The poorest members of Varna society were buried with nothing but a clay vessel. Their DNA was indistinguishable from the king's, same ancestry, same appearance. Only the gold was different, and the man who controlled the most resources had DNA that would place him genetically closer to modern-day Turkey or Lebanon than to modern-day Denmark or Germany. The 2025 Ferrara Street UDI was led by geneticist Guido Barbugiani and evolutionary biologist Silvia Girotto. They used a new probabilistic method to infer pigmentation from degraded ancient DNA samples, many of which were too damaged for the standard Hirosplexes approach. Their method tested genotype likelihoods from raw sequencing data rather than requiring high-coverage genomes. This opened up hundreds of previously unusable samples. What they found reshaped the timeline of European pigmentation. The shift toward lighter skin was not smooth. It was not linear. It happened in fits and starts, driven by migration waves, genetic drift, and natural selection, all working simultaneously. During the entire Copper Age, the Varna King's era, Europe was a mosaic. light-skinned farmers next to dark-skinned hunter-gatherers, intermediate-toned populations everywhere between. The Anatolian farmers who gave rise to the Varna culture brought some lighter skin alleles with them, but they themselves weren't light-skinned by modern standards. They were transitional, carrying some variants for lighter pigmentation, but not all. The Varna king's legacy extends beyond his own grave. The civilization he represented collapsed around 4000 BC, likely under pressure from steppe populations moving west. The Yamnaya, horse-riding herders from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, would eventually sweep across Europe in the 3rd millennium BC. They carried R1b haplogroups. They brought steppe ancestry, and they fundamentally replaced the genetic profile of European populations from Britain to Iberia. The Yamnaya contributed up to 50% of the ancestry of modern Northern Europeans. They also brought lighter skin variants that would eventually become dominant. But the Varna king lived before all of this, before the steppe migration, before the genetic transformation. He belonged to a Europe that no longer exists. A Europe where the wealthiest man on the continent had West Asian DNA, dark features, and a paternal lineage now found mostly in Africa and the Middle East. Today, fewer than 1% of European men carry haplogroup T. The lineage that once produced kings is now a statistical footnote. Modern Bulgarians carry roughly 40% steppe ancestry and 35% Anatolian farmer ancestry. The Varna king's genetic legacy is there, diluted, buried, but still present. Every bone fragment from the Varna cemetery holds the potential for more revelations, with 30% of the site still unexcavated. The story is far from complete. What other graves lie beneath? What other surprises will their DNA hold? Could there be individuals with even more unexpected ancestry? Steppe DNA, hunter-gatherer survivals. Lineages no one has predicted. Modern ground-penetrating radar has already detected anomalies beneath the unexcavated sections. The shapes suggest more burials, possibly richer ones than anything found so far. The Varna king was buried 6,500 years ago, dressed in more gold than any person who came before him. For 50 years after his discovery, the world assumed he looked like them. He didn't. His face belonged to a world before Europe became European. A world where power was measured in gold, not in the color of your skin. And somewhere beneath the Bulgarian soil, 30% of his people's cemetery still waits to tell us what else we've been getting wrong. But that is a story for another time.